Hi everyone, Lydia here with Build Show Network, and I have a really cool series coming up for you guys. We're going to be talking about different patch methods. There's a lot of different ways to patch drywall. So much of it depends on what you have access to, how big your patch is, and how much time and money you want to spend. So I have, I think, 5 different methods back here. We're going to kind of go through all of the different ways to patch. We're going to walk through them, and let's go ahead and get started on this. It should be a really fun series. So the first patch method we're going to go through is we're going to be talking about adding backing to patches. So this definitely is a little bit more for patches that need a lot of structure behind them. And you're also going to need access to a saw, and you're going to need access to wood. So say you have something that you cut out, you have a really large hole and you need backing behind there, but you're not close to studs or there's nothing there to give you support. For this method, you would take a 2x4 and cut it down, and then you're going to go ahead and screw it. So you're going to hold it to the back of the wall and then screw in through the drywall into the wood. So what happens then is you have that backing there because the screws now are through the drywall and into the wood, holding it where there is no stud or no backing. So depending on the size of your patch will depend on how much backing you have. You can also do this with little patches, so like little outlets. You can kind of just put a screw into the wood and hold the wood and then screw into your top and your bottom. So depending on how big your patch is going to depend on how much wood you're using. This is perfect for this. So as you can see, this is what we started with. And then this is what we have going on. So we used a piece of drywall. And again, this one's going to be a little more, you're going to need more supplies and more materials because so far we've got wood. You're also going to need a jab saw. You're going to need a razor blade. You're going to need a saw. So you can go ahead and patch in here with whatever drywall you have around. If you still have the old drywall, like sometimes you have to do a patch like this to get to, electrical or plumbing or something, you can absolutely use that piece that you just cut out of there to use for your patch. Sometimes that works out great. So what's really important with this is it's all prepped. As you can see, it's pretty inset. We don't want it sticking really far out of the wall. And then we go ahead and we have our drywall screws securing our drywall, and our edges are all nice and V'd, and there's no loose board here. So what we're going to do to patch this is I'm going to use some Easy Sand. I've got Easy Sand 5, and then we've got mesh tape. I'm just going to go ahead and use sticky green mesh tape, a pan, and a knife. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put our mesh tape on, we're going to mix our mud up, and then we're going to go ahead and get this all patched in. So I'm going to go ahead and put my mesh over. I don't want to be getting super far out from where I'm patching here. I don't want my mesh tape to be all the way out here. I'm going to try and keep everything pretty tidy right over that seam. You can use mesh, you can use paper, you can use 5-fuse, really whatever you want to use. And it's important when you're doing this that you want everything tight. You don't want any wrinkles. You don't want any of your mesh tape sticking up or doing anything weird, because then it'll make the patch show and you're going to have a harder time getting this to cover. So you want everything to be nice and flat and tight. So mesh tape is on. I'm going to go ahead and mix up the hot mud, and then we're going to jam it in there and give everything a coat. Okay. So I'm working with 5-minute mud here. That means you're going to have like 5 minutes to work with this, and that's about it. So it's important that you don't mix up too much. If it does set in your pan, it's not the end of the world. But this stuff is really nice for doing patching and small stuff. It says right there, patching compound. So I'm just going to go ahead and add, don't need a ton. And again, this is the powdered mud that we're working with, so we're going to add water to this and then mix it to whatever consistency we want. And being that we're packing and filling, I'm going to go a little bit thicker. Start mixing her up. Now, if you're working in occupied houses, it's always kind of a good idea to do this out at your vehicle, or, have some drop cloth down, something so you're not throwing powder all over the person's house. And I don't want to mix this too thick. I'm literally not going to be able to work with it. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's a pretty decent consistency there. Should fill nicely. So now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna jam our mud in and through. And that's really important that we're doing that. And this happens sometimes. So we wanna push our mud in and through that mesh tape. And we wanna get it into that gap in there. So when I'm doing this, I'm applying hard pressure because I really do want that in and down and through. And mesh tape can kind of be a pain sometimes. So like I'll just go ahead and get rid of that guy right there because he's just going to cause problems later. Same thing with that. It doesn't do anything with the strength with the mesh. It just helps. And now because this is 5 minute and it's mesh tape, I'm go ahead and put a coat and just kind of get this started. Now the nice thing about patching like this is that you normally are not going to be having like a lot of areas that are proud, which makes patches hard to hide later. So I'm gonna keep my mud pretty much right here. Oh, come on. Fix that right there a little bit. So I'm gonna keep my mud tight for right now, especially because it's hot mud. Hot mud sets up harder, it's harder to sand. And this is 5 minutes, so we're just gonna let it set for a minute, and then we're gonna come and we're gonna start coating out wider, and we're gonna start coating out flatter, and just kind of start pulling this patch out. All right, so this is starting to set up. It's not all the way there, but we're just gonna kind of speed it up to get through the patch process. But I went ahead and mixed up more 5 minute. It's a bit thinner this time. I'm gonna jump up a knife size. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use an 8. And I'm gonna start feathering this patch in. So there's a couple different ways to do this. You can just go straight along your edges like this. You can actually just go straight across the whole patch. It really depends on the size of your patch, how much you're needing to fill, and kind of just like personal preference. So now I'm going to start pulling tight across. I want to have a decent coat on that mesh. As you can tell right there, it's a little shallow right in the center of the patch, which actually is really good. Because what can happen is when you're patching, it is really easy to hump things out. And don't be afraid to go big with your patch when it comes to applying your mud, because you'll really start running into problems if you keep things really tight and small. So you have to think, when you're looking at a wall in general, like you want everything to look nice and smooth and even. If you keep things super tiny and super tight, your eye's gonna pick that up every time because it's gonna see that pinpoint spot. So when we're patching, we wanna try and feather our edges. We want everything to be blending in nicely. So I'm just gonna be doing the 5 minute for just bedding the tape and then just a top. I'm not gonna do any more 5 minute mud on this patch. We don't wanna be skimming with it. It just won't tie back in nicely. It's not the same texture as the finished muds. So we're gonna let this one set up, and then we're gonna come over the top with our +3. So we're back at our wood brace patch here. So we let our hot mud set up, and we're gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna go ahead and scrape any high stuff off. If there's any bubbles from any paint, so sometimes when we go over painted surfaces, it'll bubble. It's best to just kind of open those up instead of just filling them with sand. Just go ahead, give it a scrape. And now I'm gonna start working down the patch. And I've moved to +3 now. I'm on a coating mud instead of a heavy mud like we were earlier. or like a hot mud. Sorry, we're using hot mud earlier. So cut my edges. And I moved also to a bigger knife. I'm using a 10 instead of an 8. So then that way I can kind of go out further than I was before. And I think that's something that people have to realize too when you are patching. Like, don't be afraid to use a bigger knife. Your patch is going to turn out better. You're going to be happier with it if you go with a larger knife instead of just trying to do everything with a 6-inch knife. Okay, so that right there would be our skim. So if I was going to be texturing, I would go ahead, let that dry, texture over that. Now, because these walls in here are smooth and they're level 5, I would then go one more coat on this just to make sure it's perfect. But this is like perfect for texturing, but we are starting to get some pinholes, and that's what happens when we start moving to a mud like +3 and we're going over these painted surfaces. So when we start seeing that, what you're gonna have to do is just keep coating until it's gone. What will happen is eventually the mud will build up enough that it's going back into itself. So with drywall, especially fresh drywall, we have that paper face there. So the mud's able to soak into this paper and then bond with that, and the moisture goes into and through the paper and into the rock, and then, you know, that's why everything coats out nice. Now, when we're moving into painted surfaces, this surface is sealed. So this has nowhere to go but out the front. So that's why you see all those little bubbles and all those pinholes. So instead of the mud being able to go back, it has to go forward, and that air comes forward. So what happens is you just have to keep coating and coating and coating until you get to a point where the bubbles aren't there anymore. You have enough mud built up that the mud is able to soak into the mud instead of out to the front. So typically, kind of depends on the sheen, how old the paint is. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, but it's not uncommon to see bubbling. The previous patch I did, this took about 2 coats to get all of that bubbling to go away. Older rock sometimes is a little bit easier, but especially if you're doing, you know, skimming over old textures, if you are patching into older walls, it might take more. You just never know. It's kind of like a guessing game. You know, that's why when we're doing patches, we usually go time and material so that you're not getting stuck coming back and back and back and not getting paid for your time. But so this is kind of how this patch will end up looking. It's nice, it's flat. You guys can't even tell it's there anymore. A lot of good backing on there because we do have those studs back there. Again, this is really for larger patches. You can do smaller patches with this, but anything big, you're gonna wanna put some backing back behind that drywall or it's just not gonna hold well. Yeah, and that's it. You can just let it dry. Come back, do another tight skim if you need, sand it, prime it, make sure you prime, always prime your patches. You'll have issues with things coming back if you're not priming because it needs that to seal that mud and to get everything looking nice. So that's it for the stud patch. I like that, the stud patch. Anyway, that's it for me this week. I will catch you guys next week with the next patch video. I hope this helps. There's so many options out there. People tend to knock anything they don't understand. So it's kind of nice for me to be able to kind of show you guys a bunch of different options and kind of walk through a bunch of these different patch products. So I'll catch you guys next week. You can catch me on all the socials, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. I almost said Twitter. Anyway, I will catch you guys next week.